Welcome to the Enterprise Thought Leadership Podcast, where we explore the latest in enterprise trends, tech, and strategy with the top leaders shaping the future.
Hi, we welcome you to our podcast, On Stage with Enterprise Thought Leaders. My name is Kanika, and I'm the managing editor of IT Security Wire, which is our enterprise and cybersecurity focused publication. We have engaging conversations with global thought leaders and industry experts, which reach over 1.3 million business leaders worldwide. As you may know, third-party and ecosystem risk management have become top priorities, driven by factors such as AI and geopolitical tensions. ORX's data on top risks underscores this trend, drawing from insights gathered during ORX's LeadersConnect discussions in New York earlier this year. We speak with Steve Bishop. He's a research and information director at ORX to get an in-depth analysis of the current state of risk management, particularly focusing on third-party risk management functions and understand how AI can help there. Welcome to the podcast, Steve. It's great to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So as Research and Information Director at ORX, Steve leads the development of key ORX initiatives, which include the ORX scenarios, the reference taxonomy, data standards, and the quality assurance framework for data loss services. He also oversees the creation of services that support the management of material risks, such as ORX's cyber service. With a career spanning both banking and insurance, Steve brings deep expertise in operational and non-financial risk. He's been instrumental in shaping industry-wide standards and libraries, helping financial institutions enhance their risk management frameworks. So, Steve, the first question I have for you is, how do we really define third parties in the current scenario? What methods do organizations use to gain the visibility of third-party environments after they have identified them?
So I'm going to start with a sort of answering the sort of current scenario part of that question, if that's okay. We've sort of undertaken a significant piece of work over the last sort of 18, 24 months to look at the ways in which organizations are managing operational and non-financial risk. And to do that, we interviewed around about sort of 50 or so chief risk officers and heads of operational and non-financial risk from across the globe. And one of the things that we talked to them about was the environment in which they're operating. And I think that's really important because I think that provides context around third parties. So we heard time and time again in those conversations that the sort of leaders describe that the ecosystem in which their bank or insurer or asset management operates now. And by ecosystem, we mean that the environment they operate in, they are very dependent on a range of third parties, providers, suppliers, infrastructure providers, etc. And often they described sort of permeable boundaries to their organization. So the way they operate now, people work with their data, their systems, and that's really changed that ecosystem in which a financial services firm operates. Third parties have been used significantly within that ecosystem, as I mentioned, and they've been used particularly, I think, to help accelerate organizations' journeys to digital, to help them manage cost pressures, to bring specific skills and technology into the organization that wouldn't make sense for that firm to go about on its own. So I wanted to sort of provide that context, if you like, about the current scenario. In terms of how we're seeing third party defined within that, we've undertaken a significant piece of work at ORX this year, really in response to that ecosystem challenge to look at third party risk management. And we've brought together a group of sort of third party risk management leads from around about sort of 65 or so banks and insurers from our membership. And one of the first things they wanted to talk about was how do we define third party? How does everybody understand and think about third parties? And we came up with a definition as part of this work that everybody broadly agreed with. You can never suit everybody, but I think it was pretty representative of how organizations define it. And I'll read it verbatim. Essentially, they said that it's any entity or individual that provides products or services to that financial services institution. And that may include vendors, suppliers, outsourcers, agents, contractors. And they also often class intergroup arrangements. So where one part of their financial services group is providing services to another part of the financial services group. So very all-encompassing, and I think that's important given that ecosystem and that environment in which they're operating. In terms of the second part of the sort of question, so the sort of methods, if you like, that organizations are using to sort of gain visibility of those third-party environments. I think firstly, to do that, they're really thinking about how they identify their third parties to make sure they're gaining that visibility. So organizations are looking at their business through sort of a number of different dimensions. So thinking about the sort of processes and the services that they operate, they're thinking about the third parties that are in place across their business line views, if you like, and really focusing on how do we understand what third parties we're engaging with. And then they're going, I think, way beyond the sort of perhaps traditional ways of thinking about third party and the materiality of third party. So they're thinking about materiality from a financial value perspective, perhaps the sort of traditional way it's often been thought about, but they're now thinking about also what data they have, what role in a process or a critical service they provide, all sorts of different dimensions to think about understanding sort of what their third parties are, who they're working with. And then in terms of how do they gain visibility, I'm sort of taking this question from sort of how do they understand their control environment, if you like. I'd say that varies organization to organization. And what we've observed is a sort of, I guess, a maturity model, if you like. So the sort of more traditional, sort of, I guess, historic way of understanding the controls within a third party was sort of undertaking questionnaires, on-site visits, relationship management activity. And I think that's absolutely still going on, and I think is still relevant. But we're also seeing now the organizations looking to gain visibility of those third parties throughout the life cycle, if you like. So through the due diligence process now, they're looking not just at can they do this job for us, they're looking at what controls they operate, what standards do they meet, how do they conform to their risk profile. And that's before they even select a third party. They're often now setting control requirements in contracts with these third parties. In some jurisdictions, we're seeing suppliers actually offer up those controls within contracts as a way of winning business, so gaining a commercial advantage by demonstrating that they're better controlled, if you like. And that's a really interesting development, I think, and very welcome by the industry. And then we're also seeing a sort of combination of tools. So those traditional questionnaires and visits that I mentioned, but also through to bringing in data from the supplier and monitoring data, and also sort of taking independent views of those organizations, perhaps looking at third-party sources, if you like, to bring in financial information, looking at social media feeds, trying to get a real proactive feel for what's going on with that suite of third-party providers that they use. So in summary, a sort of multi-dimensional way in which they're trying to understand and gain visibility of those third-party control environments.
So, do you think direct communication tools like questionnaires and on-site visits that you just mentioned, are they effective sources here? Do they really help? Because they're pretty traditional. And does it help?
Yeah, that they are traditional, and I think they can still be effective. I think I would caveat that with if they're responded to, and if they're responded to accurately, and if you can gain the required access to sort of go and visit the relevant part of that organization that you need. But I would say that that's not always easy. And I would say on top of that they really are very much a sort of point in time assessment. So it can be sort of quite a slow process, and I think that that approach on its own is probably quite outmoded, I would say, today. I would say, and I'd question if they're appropriate for the fast-paced and sort of complex, interconnected environment in which our members operate. I think, as I sort of just touched on, we hear organisations now moving towards a sort of combination of oversight approaches, if you like. So bringing those methods that I mentioned, being more data-driven, looking to be quicker to be able to gain a view of that third party. So I think they still have their place. I think they're often used in a sort of targeted fashion, perhaps responding to certain types of risks or certain types of organizations. And they're now one of the tools that people have in their sort of armory, if you like, to be able to understand their third-party risk.
Right. So, what do you think are the benefits and limitations of supplier concentration and the risks which are associated with them? Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an interesting topic, and it's one that you won't be surprised to hear came up pretty regularly in the discussions that we've held with our third-party risk management community, sort of across this year. So, I think again, sort of hopefully helps provide a little bit of context to my answer. So, concentration risk in terms of third-party suppliers is definitely a focus of regulation and supervisory activity that we sort of see across the globe. I think it's often being looked at and thought about as part of sort of activities to sort of be more resilient and to meet the resilience requirements that numerous regulators have set organizations. I think it's also come up significantly in relation to geopolitics. I think some of the sort of geopolitical events we've seen across the last 12 to 18 months have identified and highlighted concentrations that have raised concerns and raised the need for action within organization. Those concentrations and those concerns vary depending on where you are in the globe. Again, something that people have really faced into. And I think as a result, probably particularly of the sort of geopolitical and regulatory attention, concentration's a real board and leadership focus within organizations. People really want to understand what are our sort of third-party concentrations and really understand that from a supplier risk perspective. So people are looking at concentrations on a sort of single supplier within a geography, perhaps within an important or critical bit service that they offer to their customers. Often thinking about it where there's only one option in the industry, and that's not that, you know, there are such suppliers out there, but also they've talked about concentration risk in relation to where a supplier can become financially dependent on you as well, and that you know, given lots of our members are really large, significant global financial services organization, that's not unheard of as well. So I think that context is important, and I think it shows why this topic has come up time and time again across the last sort of 9 or 10 months with our community. In terms of the sort of, I guess, the benefits, if you like, there's less suppliers to oversee if you take concentration risks. So there's less oversight challenge. You're focused very much on understanding the controls, the data across a smaller set of providers. Members have often talked about you can build a stronger strategic relationship with a concentrated set of suppliers. They understand where you're going, they understand what your business needs are, etc. And there's a lot of value in that clearly. You can identify suppliers that fit your business and your risk profile. It's often talked about that if you've got a smaller set, you can get better data and analytics on that set of suppliers as well. We actually heard a small number of organizations say that strategically they were actively taking concentration risks to try and take some of those benefits, which is something I've sort of not heard before, but again is an interesting strategy, and I think it depends on your business, your geography, the size of your operation, etc. I think that's an interesting take. The flip side of that, though, there are clearly disadvantages. It's harder to exit. It's harder to find a substitute if you're concentrated all in a smaller number of suppliers. I think a question that often comes up from the regulator is sort of, you know, it's harder to substitute. So how are you going to exit and change if you need to? And that you know, cloud's a great example where organizations have gone on board with one particular public cloud provider, and they're often asked what happens if there's a problem there. How do you back out of that? How have you managed that? That's an interesting take, and something that I'm not sure I've heard sort of necessarily good answers to at the moment. Doesn't mean they're not out there, but not, it's definitely something that's a lot of focus. And I think that reverse concentration point where you end up with suppliers you're concentrated in, you're the biggest client by a long way, and then you have sort of that financial dependency. So I think that's that they're all interesting benefits, disadvantages. I don't think there's a simple, straightforward solution out there, and I think it's something that a lot of people are grappling with at the moment and trying to talk to leadership about what's the sensible way to sort of navigate through.
And could you share some insights about the complexity of risk environment, in a more generic way? And we could probably include interconnectivity of geopolitics, AI, third party, from a second line perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I sort of mentioned at the very beginning the sort of work we did on our vision for Operation Non-Financial Risk, and the sort of complexity of the environment that highlighted. And at ORX, we undertake regular work to look at the risk landscape. It's I think a really valuable thing for our members to be able to participate in, and to be able to get the outputs from, where they get a global view on the sort of the top risks and the emerging risks in the environment. The theme that's come up more and more over the last sort of 24 months or so is you can't put risks into boxes. That's really clear. Risks aren't mutually exclusive. They're often multidimensional and interconnected across the risk profile. You quite often hear the term sort of transversal risks, if you like, and there are themes that we hear. So things like geopolitics can touch on a whole range of risks. Third party and regulatory come up regularly. AI has impacts across the profile, cyber data risks, to name but a few. Climate, again, all themes that touch on many different risks and really layer on complexity in terms of how you see and understand the risk profile. And in fact, if something goes wrong, it shows you the complexity often of how you need to manage that situation. And that sort of, there's some themes that I highlighted there that aren't risks as such, but even in the traditional risk types themselves. So third party that we're talking about today, cyber, technology, regulatory, data risk, all of those risks have real interconnections. And that I think shows the complexity of the environment. And I think it shows why there's such an industry focus on resilience now. The complexity of the environment means that things are going to go wrong. So you need to be able to understand them when they happen, and you need to understand how you're going to respond and how you're going to recover. And I think that's right. I think, cyber is a great example where our members will often talk about that trying to keep up with the cyber threat is a challenge, and tools like AI and advances in technology are being used against them as much as they're able to embrace them. So it's important they understand their weak points. It's important that they understand their critical services. It's important they understand how they would recover them. And I think that's sort of a response to that interconnectivity and that complexity. And I think it's often playing now as well into that sort of, we're often asked, what are people doing to try and understand that and report on it as well? That the sort of 10 years ago, you could report on your individual risk types, and that was probably okay. And I don't think it is any longer. So people are trying to use data more and more. They're trying to look at sort of dynamic ways of understanding their risk profile. So perhaps looking through different lenses, so looking at by risk type, but looking at risks and controls across their critical services and their processes. They're often now using sort of much more data to understand the risks. They're leveraging AI a lot more to sort of accelerate that work and improve their analysis and their capability there. And then importantly, they're then reporting to leadership and to boards, sort of maybe by more themes and topics, and trying to tell a really clear story about what's happening in that complex risk profile. So hopefully that paints a little bit of a picture about what we're hearing and what we're seeing, but also talks a little bit about what people are doing as well.
Right. And I think the next question, which naturally follows, is how's third-party risk management discipline developing today based on ORX's conversations with your third-party risk management specialists and experts? Something.
Yeah, it's a good and very timely question given the work I outlined that we're doing. It's clearly a huge priority for organizations, and I would say there's significant investment underway to mature practices. I would say that lots of organizations are bringing in more senior leaders into the space. They're upskilling. They're investing in getting the right data together to understand third-party risk management. They are using technology to help with that. They are sort of thinking about the implications of their current third-party portfolio on their risk appetite, and they're enhancing their oversight and reporting methods, and really trying to bring third-party risk management and integrating it into wider risk management practices. That interconnectivity means that it touches on so many different risk types that they're having to work with their sort of cyber colleagues, particularly their business colleagues. It's a really important and quite pivotal role within sort of risk management within organizations. And I think the fact that we've got 65 organizations working with us on this project, that have all brought forward a sort of senior leader in the third-party risk management space in the second line of defense, particularly, I think is testament to that improvement that's underway. Just pulling out a couple of statistics from the work we've done. So over 75% have a dedicated third-party risk management function. Sometimes that sits in the first line, sometimes in the second line. So I think there's some perhaps ironing out over the next sort of 24 months as to what roles and responsibilities are across the process. 66% are increasing or have increased resource. And many are really focusing on trying to drive consistent approaches across how they're managing third parties, how they're identifying them, bringing them on board and managing them through the life cycle, really trying to be consistent as an organization on that. That leads to getting better data, better understanding, better feel for what your risk profile is in the space. And I think my final comment will be that organizations are really thinking about it as a sort of strategic piece. So we're in a situation today where we're in a very complex ecosystem. We've got often lots and lots of third-party providers. Some of them are necessary. Some of them have been, you don't have any choice but to use them sometimes. But what does the next 3 to 5 years look like? What is our strategy looking like going forward? What decisions do we need to make about, do we want to take concentration risk? Do we need to reduce it? How do we want to manage third-party suppliers through our organization's critical services? And I think that's a great example for me of how operational and non-financial risk is becoming far more strategic as a discipline. The types of work that our organizations do now, that the drives forward in using technology, moving to be digital institutions, means that operational and non-financial risk has really significantly increased. And there's very much a strategic consideration now in terms of how you manage these risks. And third parties, one of those at the forefront of those discussions.
Right. So those are the questions I had for you. And really appreciate you taking time to speak with us today.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. Very, very kind. Very happy to come and talk.
Thank you for joining us for the Enterprise Thought Leadership Podcast. Please do follow us on social media and subscribe for more ideas and insights. Until next time.